On the morning of March 14th, a typical Tuesday, the cafeteria at Hanjin Logistics headquarters was already full before 8 o'clock. It was an external audit day, and the hustle and bustle of executives with briefcases and tablets in the central lobby made the atmosphere more tense than usual. In the midst of all this, Jung Soo-min was pushing her cleaning cart through the hallways of the 11th floor, the international administrative sector, where rarely anyone glanced at her. She had been making that journey every day for 4 years, always at the same time, always in the same silence. Most people didn't even know her name. To them, she was the cleaning lady, who showed up early and disappeared before lunch. On this particular morning, Soo-min was wearing blue disposable gloves and carrying 2 rolls of paper towels to the kitchen when she heard a muffled argument coming from conference room A12. The language was French. 2 men were speaking loudly in impatient tones. She hesitated for a second, but then continued her work, as she always did. But this time, a sentence caught her attention. One of them was clearly misunderstanding everything and responding in a way that could lead to a serious misunderstanding. Soo-min stopped in front of the half-open door, glanced discreetly inside, and saw that the translator she had hired had not yet arrived, and the chairman, Park Ji-hoon, was already there, his expression grim. For some reason she couldn't explain, Soo-min couldn't just walk away. Instead, she knocked lightly on the door and said in flawless French that she had noticed a translation error in the clause about contractual deadlines. The room fell silent for a few seconds. President Park, who had seen her in the hallways before but had never exchanged a word with her, looked at her in surprise. The French consultant turned away suspiciously, while the other man, a Korean director in charge of the negotiations, looked slightly embarrassed. "Do you speak French?" Park asked. She nodded calmly. There was no arrogance or attempt to show off, just a straightforward answer. "Fluently. And English, Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, Japanese, Russian, Italian, and German. I studied languages at university before I came here," she added. No one knew that, and no one had ever asked. The official translator arrived 5 minutes later, but the mood in the room had already changed. Soo-min was invited to stay, this time sitting in one of the support chairs. The meeting continued, with her making small, discreet corrections that avoided at least 2 serious mistakes. Park observed everything with a more attentive eye than usual, but without saying much. When the meeting ended, he asked everyone to leave, except Soo-min. She hesitated for a second but stayed. He asked if all that was really true, the languages, the studies, the reason she was there, and she told him, without embellishing. She had done a master's degree abroad, but when she returned, with her mother sick and without money, she accepted the first steady job she could find. The cleaning job was not her life plan, but it was what guaranteed her rent, medicine, and some stability. She never complained or tried to move up in the company, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't see any room for it. Park Ji-hoon listened in silence, his arms crossed and his brow furrowed. He didn't seem suspicious. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable, maybe with himself, maybe with the structure of the company. When she finished speaking, he didn't give her an immediate answer. He stared out the window for a few seconds, then asked her if she would be willing to leave the cleaning department if she were offered a position that suited her skills. Soo-min didn't answer right away. She looked down at the uniform she was wearing, then down at her hands. The gloves had already been removed. It was a simple question, but it carried a lot of weight. "I think I'm ready," she said, her tone as if she wasn't sure whether this was a test or a trap. But Park didn't smile or try to be friendly. He simply thanked her and said that she could return to her post for now, but that someone from management would be looking for her later that day. Soo-min returned to the ground floor with her head in a daze. She spent the afternoon trying to figure out if all that had really happened. She didn't tell anyone. She just worked the rest of her shift, cleaning the bathrooms and hallways as usual, but with the feeling that something was about to break. At the end of the shift, when she was already collecting the materials, she was called by the supervisor's extension. An envelope with the company logo was waiting for her at the reception, along with a simple letter signed by Park, informing her of the creation of a new position, International Culture Consultant. The letter said that the position required confidentiality and would initially be on a trial basis. But what caught her attention the most was the last sentence. There are talents in this company that are being wasted every day. Today, we have decided to stop ignoring them. That night, Soo-min came home without having eaten dinner. The envelope sat on the table for hours, as if she needed to confirm once again that it was real. Her mother, lying in the bedroom, noticed that something was different. But Soo-min just said that it had been a busy day. She didn't want to talk about it until she understood exactly what was happening. She spent the night wondering if this was some kind of symbolic showcase, something for the company to show diversity and inclusion without actually changing anything. Or worse, if it was just a momentary gesture that would soon be forgotten. But there was also a new feeling there, a glimmer. After so many years of invisibility, someone had looked directly at her, and not as if they were seeing a cleaning lady, but as if they were listening to a person. The next morning, she arrived at the company at the usual time, wearing her usual uniform, but was immediately intercepted by an HR employee who took her to another floor. They gave her a new temporary badge and asked her to wait in a small room near the boardroom. Inside, there was nothing special: a table, 2 chairs, a bottle of water, no ceremony. Shortly after, 2 managers, one from the international area and the other from communications, entered with tense expressions. They were not there to welcome her. They talked about the repercussions of the previous day's meeting, about the breach of protocols, and about how certain positions require formal selection processes. One of them even asked if she would be interested in staying on as just a temporary translator to avoid the discomfort of an executive position. Soo-min listened calmly, but without lowering her eyes. She understood that it would not be easy, but she also knew, right then, that the decision had not been well received internally. Park Ji-hoon didn't take long to appear in the room. He entered unannounced, with the firm posture that the position required, but with a tired look that few saw. He asked everyone to leave, leaving Soo-min alone with him. He said that he was fully aware of the difficulties he would face, and that those inner voices represented the greatest challenge. He explained that the creation of the position of International Cultural Advisor was not just a formality, but a real attempt to change a corporate culture that, for years, had ignored talents hidden in the most unlikely corners of the company. "You won't be alone, but you will need to be much stronger than you imagine," he said quietly, almost as a warning. Soo-min felt the weight of that responsibility fall on her shoulders, mixed with a timid hope. He asked her to start the next day with a meeting with the HR department and the diversity team to align expectations and strategies. He also mentioned that her role would initially be consultative, helping with intercultural communication and the integration of foreign teams, areas in which the company had been facing frequent problems. Park knew that the changes would come at a high cost and that his name would always be under fire for this decision. But for some reason, he trusted Soo-min in a way that no other executive had done until then. That meeting was brief, but enough for both of them to know nothing would be the same from then on, and perhaps no one would ever be able to go back. The next day, Soo-min arrived at the office feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. The meeting with HR and the diversity team took place in a simple room, where several people were already waiting for her with expressions that varied between curiosity and skepticism. Some whispered quietly, others avoided eye contact. Soo-min realized that, for many there, she was still that cleaning lady who went unnoticed in the hallways, not the new executive trying to establish herself. During the initial presentation, she heard veiled criticism and questions that, because they were so obvious, sounded like attempts to disqualify her. But Soo-min answered clearly and objectively, showing that her personal experience and her command of languages could be a real differentiator and not just a symbol. After the meeting, as she walked down the hallway, she felt looks ranging from astonishment to disbelief. Some colleagues who had previously ignored her presence began to look at her with a mixture of surprise and distrust. However, among these looks there were also some shy smiles and discreet nods, small gestures that indicated support. It was the first time in years that Soo-min felt that perhaps she was not alone in this challenge. But she knew that this initial acceptance would be just the beginning of a long battle to change the company's mindset and prove every day that talent can be found where it is least expected. In the days that followed, the repercussions of Soo-min's appointment began to reach the highest levels of the company. Whispered comments, low-voiced conversations around the coffee machines, even discreet messages in WhatsApp groups among executives. Many doubted her abilities, while others felt uncomfortable with the break with traditional hierarchies. Soo-min, for her part, continued her work discreetly, avoiding conflicts but always asserting her presence. She knew that every small step she took would be watched closely, and that any slip-up could be used to discredit her. On the other hand, Park Ji-hoon faced pressure from boards and partners who questioned his decision. Some even suggested that the move was a media ploy to divert attention from bigger issues at the company. But for Park, it was a personal gamble. He believed that real change could only come from recognizing hidden talent, even if it meant going against what Korean corporate culture traditionally accepts. He knew that this decision could cost him his reputation, but he also knew that ignoring this talent meant continuing to miss valuable opportunities for the company. Soo-min realized that in order to earn her place, she would need to prove her worth not only in theory, but in daily practice. She began attending meetings with international teams where her fluency in several languages and cultural knowledge facilitated negotiations and avoided misunderstandings that had previously gone unnoticed. Many colleagues were surprised by her assertiveness, but not everyone was ready to accept this new reality. Some critics tried to belittle her work, saying that her rise had been undeserved or the result of a whim of the president. Soo-min listened, but avoided direct confrontation. Her focus was on being useful, proving that her position was not just symbolic. At the same time, her family felt the change. Her mother, who had been dealing with health problems for years, was proud, but worried about the burden that all this could mean for Soo-min. The pressure was increasing, as was her fatigue. But for Soo-min, the chance to show who she really was priceless. She knew she couldn't waste the opportunity, even though she knew that many still saw her as the invisible cleaner, the one who had been put in the wrong place for years. It was the beginning of a new phase, a constant struggle between recognition and prejudice. As the weeks passed, Soo-min began to see the true extent of the distrust within the company. It wasn't just suspicious glances. There were meetings where her suggestions were ignored or downplayed, and other times when her chair seemed invisible, as if her presence were an inconvenience. She also began to notice that certain people who had previously taken no notice of her were now steering clear, afraid of compromising themselves or being associated with the unlikely new executive. Still, she stood firm, knowing that her work could help foreign colleagues and prevent mistakes that had previously gone unnoticed. It was a quiet victory out of the spotlight, but a crucial one. Meanwhile, Park Ji-hoon was facing increasing internal and external pressure. Confidential reports indicated that his decision to promote Soo-min was being criticized by internal boards, and some board members even suggested that he backtrack to preserve the company's image. But Park stood firm, even though he knew it could cost him his career. In private meetings, he argued that human value and competence should not be tied to traditional titles or positions. The bet on Soo-min was not just about her, but about the possibility of paving the way for other invisible people who, like her, had much to contribute but were ignored by the system. Over time, Soo-min managed to build a small but significant network of allies within the company, people who somehow identified with her story or recognized the importance of the change she represented. These supporters began to defend her, in meetings and help integrate her ideas into international projects. Her increased visibility brought new challenges, of course. Veiled attacks continued, and pressure to quit was constant. Still, Soo-min remained focused, understanding that her work was not just for her, but for all those who, for too long, had been undervalued and ignored in the shadows of the organization. At the end of that year, in a low-key ceremony, Soo-min was officially recognized as an international culture consultant. There was no party, no loud announcement, just a simple and silent statement, but one that meant a lot to her. It was confirmation that her efforts had paid off, that the company was beginning to change, even if slowly. But more than that, it was the symbol of a transformation that went beyond the position, the breaking down of invisible barriers that existed within the Korean corporate environment. Something that, on that day, changed Soo-min's trajectory forever, and that to this day cannot be forgotten. From that day on, Jung Soo-min's life was never the same. She continued to work hard, but the way she was perceived changed profoundly, even if some resistance still lingered. The position she was given was not just a title, but a new chance to show that people are much more than their apparent roles. For her, that opportunity represented the end of a long and painful invisibility, proof that sometimes a single moment can turn everything upside down, for better or for worse. And for many inside the company, that change came as a silent shock. After all, how many Jung Soo-mins are there anywhere? How many people with hidden talents go unnoticed every day simply because no one paid close attention? Hers was never just about a cleaning lady who became an executive. It was about the courage to recognize what is invisible, to question patterns, and, in the midst of everyday life, to make room for an entire life to transform. And that, for those who experienced it, all up close remains a story that is hard to forget.